What if Balon Greyjoy joined Robb Stark? Today we're exploring exactly that. Theon comes home to Pike with the offer, and for once, Balon listens. Not because he's changed, because Tyrion Lannister just became Hand of the King, and Balon has spent 30 years watching Lannisters destroy men who underestimated them. He won't call it an alliance. He'll call it two wolves hunting the same prey. And Robb Stark suddenly has a navy. Let's begin. The hall smelled of salt and old stone, and the silence of a man who had decided not to speak yet. Theon stood in the middle of it and did not move, because moving would be wrong. Balon Greyjoy sat in the sea stone chair. He read the letter. He read it again. Yara sat at the long table to his left, hands flat on the wood, face giving nothing. She had been arguing for the eastern option for a fortnight and losing, and she had the sense not to show the argument was turning. Tyrion Lannister had just taken the handship. Balon had received that intelligence 4 days ago and discussed it with nobody. The Tyrell fleet at Highgarden was moving. The window for Ironborn independence, seized unilaterally, was narrowing in ways that pride alone could not stop. Theon said Robb was offering formal recognition of Ironborn sovereignty over the Western Seas. He said Robb wasn't asking for submission. Balon looked at Yara. She held his gaze 2 seconds, then looked at the table. "Repeat the offer," Balon said. Theon repeated it. Balon asked for wine. He almost never drank before sundown. He asked her opinion because he already knew it. She said, "Raiding north alone, we get what we can take. Fighting beside the wolf, we get what they negotiate for us. I'd rather negotiate from strength than raid from opportunity." Balon said negotiating was for men who couldn't fight. Negotiating from the position of a fleet that just cut Lannisport off from the sea. Yara said, "Is something else." He refilled his cup. He said, "Draft the counter terms. We fight our war beside their war. Our captains answer to me, not the boy king. The price is sovereignty and the Seastone Chair's formal recognition by whatever council governs. When this is over." Theon, who had come home expecting rejection, felt something he had not felt in Westeros for 10 years. Useful. The counter terms arrived at Robb's camp 8 days later. He read them in his command tent with Catelyn, Bolton, and the Great Chan. The room went quiet. Balon wasn't asking to be Robb's admiral, co-belligerent status, first claim on western ports. Theon as full liaison, not hostage. The word hostage absent, underlined by its absence. At the bottom, in Balon's own hand, we do not bend, we do not break, we do not ask twice. Robb read those lines 3 times. He knows we need him more than he needs us. The Great John said, "Then we accept and give him nothing he didn't earn." Catelyn said, "We accept and remember that a man who will not kneel will not follow orders." Bolton said nothing. He was reading over Robb's shoulder, and something in his face had shifted, small, almost invisible, and Catelyn noted it without yet knowing what it meant. Yara Greyjoy did not sack Lannisport. Balon had been specific. Interdict, do not conquer. A sacked Lannisport unified the West against the Ironborn. A Lannisport that watched merchant ships disappear to a fortnight, that couldn't receive supplies, that waited for an engagement that never came. That was a strategic accomplishment requiring no formal battle. Within 3 weeks, the Lannister supply chain's Western Sea component had effectively ceased to function. Tywin received the intelligence in Harrenhal and called his council. His expression did not change. His commanders looked frightened. This was how they knew it was serious. Theon sat in Robb's war councils and gave fleet reports with a precision that demonstrated he understood the naval strategy. He watched the Lord's faces, the careful neutrality of men who had not forgotten that he grew up as a ward of Winterfell, which was a polite word for a hostage, trying to decide whether that history made him more or less trustworthy in this specific role. He had been watching men run that calculation his entire life. He did his job. He returned to his tent alone each evening, not quite Ironborn enough for his father's respect, not quite Northern enough for Robb's lord's trust. It was the oldest feeling he had. Tywin's countermove took 12 days and confirmed everything. He did not send a fleet against Yara. There was no Lannister fleet adequate for that. He sent a raven to the Arbor, the Red Wine Fleet, the largest naval force in the south, belonging to a family that served the Tyrells. Tywin's offer was specific: formal recognition of the Arbor's trade monopoly in exchange for an immediate campaign against the Ironborn fleet's exposed southern flank. If the Red Wines accepted, Yara was caught between the coast she was raiding and a professional force in waters she didn't know as well as they did. Robb received the intelligence through Catelyn's sources and brought it to Theon. Theon said, "Yara needs to know tonight. Can the Ironborn handle the Red Wine Fleet?" Theon said the thing he knew Robb didn't want to hear. The first time in the alliance that an honest answer cost him. Not if the Red Wines find their anchorage. If Tywin pins them against the Westerland's coast while the Red Wines come from the south, he didn't finish. Robb finished. Yara's fleet is gone. Yes, so we move the land campaign faster than we planned. Yes, Robb said. You know what that costs us. Theon said, I know what it costs if we don't. Ashmark fell on a Tuesday. A Lannister cavalry force was routed near the Gold Road 3 days later. Neither victory was as complete as it would have been with another week's preparation. Prisoners were paroled too quickly. Supply lines extended past their safe reach. The Greyjoy told Robb they were burning wood that hadn't dried yet. It was going to smoke. Robb said he knew. The alternative is a dead alliance and a Red Wine fleet that pins the Ironborn against a coast they cannot use. So Balon's problem becomes our problem. The Greyjoy said, all alliances work that way. His problem becomes ours, or we don't have an alliance. The Greyjoy was quiet. Then, that's what your father would have said. He said it the way he said things he wasn't sure were compliments. With the care of a man who had watched Ned Stark's particular quality of honor become Ned Stark's particular manner of dying. Yara met Robb on the beach of a fishing village his men had cleared. She came under a gray flag, not white. She didn't do white flags. It was the first face-to-face contact between both sides of the alliance. She was entirely competent and entirely unimpressed by him. She briefed him on the Red Wine Fleet's movements with the precision of a week's careful tracking. When he asked if the Ironborn could hold against the Red Wines, she said, "We can hold if we choose our ground. We cannot hold if someone else chooses it for us." She looked at him directly. "Don't let Tywin choose the ground again. That's the second time someone has said that to me. Then listen to it." Catelyn intercepted the letter not through spycraft, but through the particular vigilance of a woman who had been watching Roose Bolton since the evening he read Balon's counterterms over Robb's shoulder. And his face did what it did. A message left Bolton's tent in the small hours, addressed in cipher to a relay station she didn't recognize. The outer wrapper unciphered, because cipher was for content, not address, said, in Bolton's careful hand, The wolf runs with the kraken now. This changes the accounting. She didn't know what accounting. She knew that a man sending midnight letters in cipher was conducting a conversation he didn't want the camp to know about. She brought it to Robb before dawn. "Find out who he writes to," he said. The morning light was coming over the Westerlands hills. Somewhere on the western sea, Yara's fleet held position against a threat closing from the south. In his tent, Roose Bolton slept with whatever calculation he was running, known only to himself, and the war had just grown a second front that had nothing to do with Lannisters. The plan required Robb's forces to reach the cliff road above Lannisport Harbor at the same hour Yara's fleet entered the bay from the north. 4 days at the beach meeting had produced a signal system. 3 fire beacons on Robb's ridge, answered by a horn from the fleet's lead ship. The system worked. They were within 20 minutes of the agreed hour. The Lannister garrison had been reinforced 2 days earlier by cavalry that moved faster than Robb's intelligence said it could. The force waiting in the pincer was larger than the pincer was designed for. Yara didn't wait for new orders. The signal had been exchanged and the fleet was committed. The time to receive instructions from the ridgeline was longer than she had. 3 longships went directly into the harbor mouth as a feint. Fast, loud, pulling the garrison's eyes to the water. She held the main fleet back. Robb's land force, reading the changed situation, shifted from coordinated pincer to a direct push down the cliff road. The Lannister cavalry split its response. Neither half was enough. The garrison surrendered at midday. Robb stood on the dock, looking at the largest ironborn fleet he had ever seen. Yara looked at him from her long ship's prow and said, "Loud enough to carry. Your cavalry is slow. Your feint cost me 3 men on the cliff road. 3 men, not dismissively, as a statement of proportion. Each of them had a name. So did every man I've lost in this war. It was the first genuine exchange they had, and it was the beginning of the only thing that could make the alliance survivable. 2 commanders who respected each other's competence without needing to share each other's values." 3 days after Lannisport fell, the Redwyne fleet turned south. Not because it had been beaten. It was never engaged. Lord Paxter, Redwyne had received a raven from Highgarden. Mace Tyrell had decided to negotiate with Robb's coalition, and the Redwyne fleet's participation in a Lannister naval campaign was now politically inconvenient. That raven had been triggered by one from Olenna Tyrell to Catelyn Stark. Itself the product of conversations Catelyn had been conducting through intermediaries for 3 weeks. She told Robb over supper, calmly. He stared at her. "You did this. I wrote some letters. You turned the Redwyne fleet around. The Tyrells turned it around. I gave them a reason to want to." The harbor behind them held ironborn longships in the last evening light, and Robb looked at his mother with the expression of a son discovering his parent was operating at a level of sophistication he had not fully mapped. And somewhere to the south, a negotiation was forming that none of them had consented to yet. He objected not to the outcome. The Redwyne fleet turning south was unambiguously good. He objected to the method. Catelyn Stark had negotiated with the Tyrells without consulting the Ironborn side. The terms were unknown to Balon, which meant commitments may have been made affecting Ironborn interests, specifically the Western Sea Lane question, without his consent. His raven to Robb's camp was 7 lines. It contained the phrase, "Our agreement does not include your mother making promises on my behalf," with the specificity of a man at his most controlled, which was his most dangerous register. Theon read it over Robb's shoulder. "He's not wrong. I know." Robb said it with the face he used when knowing something gave him no comfort. Catelyn's response was the most precise political writing she produced in the entire war. She acknowledged she should have consulted Balon before approaching the Tyrells. She explained the Redwyne fleet's speed had made the consultation window inadequate. She provided the full terms of what she had agreed, which contained nothing about Western sea lanes, because she was too careful to commit someone else's sovereignty without consent. Balon read it and was quiet a long time. Yara at his elbow. She's better at this than Theon. She's better at this than most, without warmth, but with the precision of a man who does not give respect easily giving it. His response was 3 lines. The alliance stands. Future third-party contacts to be shared. Before initiation, he required Catelyn present at any further Tyrell negotiation. Robb told his mother, "He wants you in the room." She said, "Good. That's where I do my best work." Theon's position had always been structurally impossible. After Lannisport and the Balon-Catelyn exchange, the impossibility became acute. Robb's lords treated him as something between advisor and liability. Balon's ravens had grown shorter, fleet positions, tactical updates, nothing personal. And the shortness told Theon more than any emotional message would. He was the seam between 2 materials that did not naturally bond. The stress was increasing with every success the alliance had, because every success made the partners more dependent on each other, and therefore more resentful of that dependency. Late one night, tent flap open to a western wind that smelled of salt. Theon wrote 2 letters he did not send. One to Yara, one to Robb. Both said, "I am not sure I can keep doing this much longer." He put them in the fire. In the morning, he went back to work. He always did. But somewhere to the south, a negotiation in Highgarden was forming. His father and Robb's mother in the same room for the first time. Olenna Tyrell across the table, and none of them would be fully honest with the other 2, which was the beginning of a problem already on its way. Catelyn and Balon arrived separately, with separate escorts, and met in Olenna Tyrell's solar. None of the 3 had been fully honest with the other 2. That was how the most interesting negotiations always began. The dynamic between them was established in the first 60 seconds. Balon treated Catelyn with the courtesy he reserved for people he found competent but not important. Polite, and he did not look at her when she spoke. She treated him with the courtesy she reserved for people whose respect she had not yet earned. Precise. No warmth she didn't feel. They were co-negotiators who happened to be allied, which was different from allies. Olenna noticed the distinction and used it. She addressed the first 3 questions to Catelyn, watching Balon's face. Then she pivoted to Balon for the 4th, watching Catelyn's. By the end of the first hour, she had a clearer picture of the Stark Greyjoy alliance's internal tensions than either of them had given her consciously. Both knew it. She was magnificent. Olenna wanted 2 things: Margaery on a throne, and the Reach's agricultural sovereignty protected regardless of who sat on it. She had been running simultaneous negotiations with the Lannisters' Stannis and Robb's coalition for 6 months. The Tyrells would be the last bidder standing. She said to Balon, "The Reach does not kneel to the Iron Islands. We're not asking for submission, only that the western sea lanes belong to iron-born ships. Acknowledged for the duration of the war? Permanently. Tyrell ships keep right of passage." "That is more reasonable than I expected." "I can be reasonable," Balon said, "when it costs me nothing." She looked at him steadily. "Let's see if that's still true when it costs you something." On the second day, Olenna put Margaery on the table, not as a gesture, as the central offer. The Tyrell army, the food supply, the red wine fleet in Arbor Waters, all of it organized around Marjorie as queen of whatever arrangement emerged. Catelyn was quiet a long time. She was thinking about Robb's promise to a Frey girl, real, even if not yet binding, and about Robb himself, who would decide on strategic grounds while knowing underneath them that strategy and the people inside it are not cleanly separable. Balon was thinking about the word permanently and whether Olenna Tyrell could deliver what she was promising. He said, "The boy king decides his own marriage." "Of course," Olenna said, "but it helps if you both recommend it." She looked between them. 3 people in a room, none of them fully honest with the other. 2, and every word spoken here was pulling the war toward a shape that none of them had planned for, and all of them had been working toward, and the problem that would arrive later was already in the room, dressed as an agreement. Catelyn returned from Highgarden and presented the offer. Robb listened to all of it before saying a single word, which he always did, and which always made the room uncomfortable. Because his face gave nothing, his first response was not about Marjorie. It was about Walder Frey. "I gave my word to cross the twins. You gave your word to marry a Frey girl. You have not done so." "The promise is the same thing," Theon said. He was always in the tent now, between 2 worlds, belonging to neither. "Walder Frey cares about elevation, not your word. Offer him something worth more than the marriage." "What's worth more than a marriage alliance with the king in the north? A marriage alliance with the Iron Islands." He paused. "Not me. I'm nobody's prize. But Balon has other branches on Harlaw. Balon will never agree to that. Ask him." He said it with the tone of a man who knows his father better than his father knows himself on a specific question. Robb accepted Marjorie the way he made all his war decisions. Work out what it costs, what it buys, whether the arithmetic holds, then say yes without agonizing. He said to Catelyn, "Tell Lady Olenna yes. The Frey problem is mine to solve. Marjorie Tyrell is a person, not a transaction. I know that too. Complete seriousness. I will treat her as one." Catelyn looked at her son, 18 years old, becoming the role faster than the person inside it could keep up. She told him it was both a strength and a grief. He said, "Most things are." Robb's raven to Balon proposed a Frey Greyjoy marriage, a Frey grandson for a Greyjoy girl from the lesser branches on Harlaw. Balon's response came in 14 hours. 4 words. "Name the girl." Theon went, still reading it. "Is that agreement?" Robb said. "That's my father saying he thought of this before you did, and has been waiting for you to catch up. He's been thinking about how to anchor Frey to the Alliance since week 2. Freys control the twins, tie them by blood on both sides. Stark through a daughter, Greyjoy through a cousin. They cannot turn coat without breaking both their legs at once. He didn't tell me this. He wasn't sure you'd thought far enough ahead yet." Robb sat with that. So the man who rejected alliance on principle has been planning 2 marriages ahead of me inside the same alliance. He's been playing this game his whole life. Good. Without resentment. Then we're learning from the right person. This was the moment Theon felt something he had not felt in either of his homes, that his father and his friend were becoming, slowly and imperfectly, something that could actually win this war, and that he was the seam holding them together, and that being a seam was not the same as being nothing. Tywin abandoned the Westerlands. The intelligence was checked 3 times before it was believed. Casterly Rock surrendered to whatever siege the coalition could manage. Tywin moved his main force east and marched to King's Landing. He had done the same arithmetic the Alliance had and reached the correct conclusion. The Westerlands campaign was lost against Tyrell, Stark, and Greyjoy combined. King's Landing could hold indefinitely if Tywin defended it in full preparation. He was betting the coalition could not take a city he was ready for, calculating, as always, on what his enemies were actually capable of, not what they claimed. The coalition debated following him south for 3 days. It was the most honest debate the Alliance had. The Tyrell contingent, led by Loras, wanted to march immediately. Their interest was in what came after the city fell, not the march itself. Yara's representative said the Ironborn fleet could threaten the Blackwater, but not take a city. Sustained siege erased Ironborn advantages. Balon's position, through Theon, rapid assault, yes. Siege, no. If it became a siege, the Ironborn would take Casterly Rock in the interim. Sound strategically, problematic politically, because it gave Balon the Westerlands seat before the war was finished. Catelyn said the Freys were watching. Walder's arrangement held only while the Alliance appeared to be winning. Robb listened to all of it. We march south. No siege. Direct assault with the Blackwater as Yara's objective. If we can't take it in a month, we reassess. Nobody liked this completely. Everyone agreed. Catelyn found the letter herself. Not intercepted. Delivered. A Lannister courier under a white flag to Roose Bolton, carrying a message, unencrypted, not because it was careless, but because it was not meant to be secret from Bolton. It was meant to be secret from Robb. The offer was from Tywin. Not a bribe. He did not bribe. He negotiated. If Bolton withdrew at the moment of the King's Landing assault, Tywin would guarantee him the wardenship of the North and formal recognition of House Bolton as the paramount house in the region, superseding Stark. The courier had been waiting 3 days for a reply. Catelyn brought the letter to Robb without comment. Robb read it. Has he replied? Not yet. Good. He stood. Bring Bolton here. He said it with the voice of someone who had closed one chapter of uncertainty and opened another. Cleaner lines. No better odds. The war had always been going to produce this moment. He would rather have it now before the walls of King's Landing than at the wrong gate at the wrong hour. Robb did not accuse him. He put the letter on the table and said, I need to know if you have replied. Bolton looked at the letter, then at Robb. No, I believe you. He said it because he did. Bolton was too careful to reply before calculating every angle, and 3 days wasn't enough time. You are relieved of command of the eastern flank. Sir Wendell Manderley takes the position. You will return to the Dreadfort. He said it as an administrative reassignment, not a punishment. That was how Robb Stark handled betrayal, when the betrayal had been solicited but not yet enacted. Bolton looked at him a long moment. You are more your father's son than I expected. I hope so. Your father is dead, and you're going home. One of those is a tragedy. The other is an administrative decision. I'll leave you to determine which is which. The coldest thing Robb Stark had said in the war. Everyone in the tent heard it. Bolton's removal solved a betrayal problem and created a command problem. The eastern flank was now Manderley's. Loyal, capable, but not at this scale. And Robb had 3 days until the march. He distributed command the way he did everything, by asking what the people around him could carry. Loras Tyrell took a larger role in the vanguard. Yara agreed by Raven to hit the Blackwater simultaneously with the land assault. Theon was given a formal military command for the first time. Coordination between Yara's naval force and Robb's land force at the Blackwater crossing. The role required both fluencies he had spent his life being punished for: northern land tactics and iron-born seamanship. Robb gave it without explaining why, which was how he gave things he valued. Yara won't like taking coordination from me. She'll take it from the role, not from you. Make the role worth taking from. Balon's Raven arrived the next morning, the angriest communication in the Alliance's history. Not about Theon's promotion, about the entire Bolton situation. A traitor in Robb's command for months. Ironborn fleet positions, captain names, tactical plans, potentially available to Tywin for the duration of Bolton's tenure. Tell me how many of my captains' names Tywin Lannister knows. No good answer existed. Yara had already changed fleet protocols on her own authority, arriving at the same conclusion before Balon's Raven reached her. Theon read it twice. He's right about the security problem, and he's using it to express something else. What's the something else? That he never fully trusted this and now has evidence for why. It's insurance, no pleasure in it. It's also the truth. Is he going to pull the fleet? No. But he'll remind us, from now until the war ends, that he was right not to fully trust us. A pause. Accuracy is what he has left when he can't have control. In this alliance, that might have to be enough. Yara's fleet entered the Blackwater at the same hour Robb's land force reached the Mudgate. Coordination Theon spent 3 sleepless nights arranging, which worked within 40 minutes of the agreed time. The best the Alliance had ever done. The Blackwater was fiercer than anyone planned. Tywin had chain-linked boats across the bay's narrows that broke the Ironborn formation's first pass. Wildfire burned 3 Ironborn ships before Yara rerouted around the chain. On land, Loras Tyrell's cavalry hit the Mudgate at full speed, and the gate held, and the ladders went up in the gray dawn, and the wall fighting was the worst of the campaign. Robb was at the van. The wall did not fall at the first assault. Theon's coordination role at the Blackwater was the best military thing he had ever done. Not brilliant, but exactly what it needed to be. He read the fleet's position, read the land force's position, and adjusted the timing of the Ironborn's second approach to coincide with the moment Robb's forces drew maximum defensive attention to the northern wall. The second approach was clean. Yara reached the chain in the lead ship and broke it herself. A weighted anchor swung as a ram in a maneuver her crew had practiced, and the chain went down, and the Ironborn fleet poured through, and the harbor was theirs within the hour. 11 ships, 60 dead. Yara sent Theon a single raven. Tell the wolf the harbor is his. He carried it to Robb himself, running. And when he delivered it and watched Robb's face change from the controlled tension of a commander unsure of his eastern flank to the release of a commander whose plan was working, Theon felt something he had no name for, except the oldest name. Pride that was not his, but that he had been part of making. The Mudgate fell at midday. The harbor at noon. Coalition forces poured into King's Landing, and the street fighting was brutal. Tywin had garrisoned the major intersections with disciplined soldiers who did not break. By evening, the coalition held the harbor, the Mudgate district, and the Street of Steel. Tywin held the Red Keep, the Great Sept Plaza, and the Eastern Quarter. He sent no offer of surrender. Nothing at all. Robb's camp outside the Mudgate, city fighting still audible 3 streets away. Catelyn said, "He's waiting." For what? For us to make a mistake? Run out of time? Disagree with each other? She looked toward the harbor where iron-born flags flew. 2 of those 3 are possible. Which 2? You know which 2. He did. The war had come to its pivot. What could win or lose it now was not the Red Keep's walls. It was whether 3 parties who did not trust each other could hold a city long enough to force a man who had never surrendered to do the one thing he had never done. The city was nominally theirs, functionally divided into 3. Small folk watched different soldiers patrol different districts and kept their heads down and waited. Tywin Lannister had not said a word in 9 days. The Ironborn relationship with the Harbor District was exactly what everyone feared and exactly what Balon planned. They did not sack it. Looting would end the alliance, and Balon would not risk the alliance for cargo. But they taxed it. Every ship paid toll. Every merchant paid protection. Not theft by the technical definition. Indistinguishable from theft by every practical one. The city's merchants sent delegations to Robb daily. Robb sent them to Theon. Theon sent word to Yara. Yara returned the same message in 3 different phrasings. This is what a fleet costs. She was not wrong. Nobody in the coalition was wrong about their own position. That was the problem with alliances built on self-interest. Everyone was right, and the interests did not overlap. Tyrion smuggled a message to Catelyn through a servant passage. It said, "My father will negotiate. He needs a face-saving condition. Tell the Wolf King to offer him one." Catelyn brought it to Robb. "He's telling us how to end this without storming the keep." Why would he do that? Because if we storm it, his father and his sister probably die, and he cares about that even when he pretends he doesn't. Tywin needs to surrender to the 7 kingdoms, not to a boy king. Summon uncommitted lords, a council he can submit to without submitting to you personally. Robb was quiet. Then, "You've already drafted it." Word reached Balon before it reached half the southern lords, because Theon made sure of it. Balon's response was his fastest. Ironborn representation on the council, voting rights equivalent to any regional seat, and the council's first act to be permanent written recognition of Iron Island's sovereignty. Seals, not words. If this is not in the first session, I take the fleet home. Not a threat, a statement of what would happen. If he pulls the fleet, the harbor falls within a week, Robb said. Yes, and if Balon gets full voting rights, Tywin won't negotiate with the council. Yes. Both are true and mutually exclusive. Yes, no solution offered. Theon had stopped pretending solutions existed before they did. So what do? Talk to Yara? Not Balon? Yara first. My father makes decisions. Yara changes the frame around the decision. If she changes the frame, the decision changes. The authority of someone who has studied a person their entire life. She's the only one who can. It was the most honest thing Theon had said about his family in 6 months of service, and the only direction the alliance had left. Robb came to the ship rather than summoning Yara to land. She noticed and filed it without comment. First time either had spoken without a war council present. I need your help. Not a request for Ironborn assistance, a personal ask the kind Northern Lords made among themselves, and which was not something they typically extended to Ironborn. Tell me the problem. He laid it out, Balon's demand, Tywin's pride, the mutual exclusivity. She listened without interrupting. She did this when she'd already started solving, and needed the full picture first. My father doesn't need voting representation. He needs the appearance of it. A council seat without veto is different from one with it. If the islands have a seat, but the council requires a supermajority Ironborn alone can't block, my father attends with his seals and his dignity, and Tywin negotiates with a council my father is formally part of, but functionally cannot obstruct. Neither can reject this without looking unreasonable. That's the only kind of solution available. Will Balon accept it? I'll present it. He'll argue. He'll accept. He always accepts things that preserve his dignity. He has very few actual principles and a great many sources of dignity. Know the difference, and you can work with him. After the council problem was resolved, she said, Theon, what about him? He's going to break. He's been in an impossible position 6 months and hasn't yet, but the kind of not breaking he's doing costs something on the back end. When the war is done, he needs somewhere to be that is actually his, not liaison, not in between. His. I know. Do you? Knowing and doing are different things. I'll do something about it. Good. She said it in exactly the tone Balon used for things he considered resolved. Robb noticed and said nothing. It was one of 3 times in the alliance he saw Yara and Balon clearly in the same moment, and each time it told him where Ironborn pride came from, and where, therefore, it could be approached. 3 days later, while Yara was in Pike presenting the modified proposal to Balon, Tywin sent a message from the Red Keep, addressed not to Robb, not to Catelyn, not to Balon, to the Lords of Westeros, a formal request for Council of the Realm. A succession crisis? Not a military defeat. It accepted the council framework Catelyn designed. It did not mention Robb's coalition. It addressed the Lords as if the coalition were a temporary weather event that institutional governance could absorb. Catelyn read it 3 times. He's brilliant. I know. He's also cornered. Both are true simultaneously. Call the Lords. In Pike, Balon read Yara's account of the modified proposal, the non-veto seat, the permanent sovereignty recognition, and sat with it a long time. Then, tell him we'll be there. Completely, without revision. As if the world had simply needed time to arrange itself. Lannister red and gold, hung beside Stark direwolves, Greyjoy krakens, and Tyrell roses. The Lords sat in a semicircle around a table with no head. That had been Catelyn's instruction, and everyone present understood what it meant. Tywin Lannister and Balon Greyjoy had never been in the same room. Every person at the table knew this. The silence before the council opened held everything that silence between enemies holds: history, hatred, calculation, and the mutual respect that exists only between people who have survived each other. For the first 3 hours they spoke through the table, arguments addressed to the assembled lords that were transparently aimed at each other. Everyone let this happen, because the alternative was one of them leaving. By the afternoon session, something shifted, not warmth. The efficiency that develops between 2 intelligent people who have stopped performing for the gallery, the closest to respect they would ever manage. It lasted 3 days and produced a settlement. The settlement satisfied no one completely and everyone adequately. Joffrey removed, Tommen on the throne as a minor with a regent's council. The North formally independent under Robb, the first in 300 years, sealed with Lannister and Tyrell signatures, the Iron Islands receiving permanent sovereignty and first claim rights on the western sea lanes, but not the mainland ports. Those paid Ironborn toll through treaty mechanism. The distinction Yara and Robb had worked out on the flagship Tyrell's seat on the Regent's Council confirmed. Balon sat at the table when the seals were pressed and did not speak during the signing. When the last seal dried, he said, to the room, to no one, "We do not kneel." Then he stood and walked out and did not attend any of the subsequent festivities. Exactly what everyone expected. Theon was not in the Great Hall. He was in the harbor running Ironborn fleet logistics. Robb found him on the dock, watching longships at anchor in late afternoon light, and told him it was done. Theon nodded. Did my father get what he needed? He got what he came for. The sovereignty? Yes. Good. A silence. What do I do now? Whatever you want. I don't know what that means. I know. That's what I want to fix. You have larger things to fix. I'm the king who couldn't have done this without the liaison. The liaison gets to choose what comes next. No ceremony. Plain. Theon looked at the water a long time. I want to go to sea. That's the first thing you've said to me in 6 months that sounds like you. Don't tell my father. Yara already told me you'd say that. Theon stared at him. Robb was already walking back toward the city, not looking back, and there was something in the not looking back that was itself an answer to everything Theon Greyjoy had been trying to ask for 30 years. The Ironborn harbor toll was the settlement's first practical problem. Arriving within 6 weeks of the seals drying, Lannisport merchants contested it. 3 Reach houses filed a formal petition citing a charter of Westerosi commerce so old nobody had read it in 100 years, and which turned out, when Tyrion read it, to contain provisions both relevant and completely ambiguous. Balon received this with the satisfaction of a man who had prepared his response. The treaty had seals, and seals supersede charters. And if the Regent's Council wished to test this before every lord who signed the settlement, he was available. The problem did not resolve. It became the first of 17 ongoing disputes that would define the Stark-Greyjoy relationship for the next decade. Significantly less dangerous than the war, Robb told Catelyn, and significantly more exhausting. Robb and Marjorie were married in the 7th month after the settlement, and the marriage was not what either expected, and better for that. She was extraordinary at the public dimension of queenship, which complemented his near-complete disinterest in it. He governed. She was seen governing. She managed what he couldn't about the optics of the new Northern Court while he did the work. They developed a working partnership first and something resembling friendship second, and what it became after that was their private business. But it was real rather than performed, and the realm noticed. Catelyn, watching them at the first state supper in Winterfell, said to Olenna, who had come north for the wedding and was evidently delighted by the cold, for reasons she would not explain, "You chose well." She chose well. I arranged the introduction, said with the precision that was her gift. Catelyn smiled for the first time in months. Balon Greyjoy sent one personal letter in his life. It arrived at Winterfell addressed to Theon 9 months after the settlement. 4 pages in his own hand. Theon said later, it was the most frightening thing he received in the entire war, because Balon writing at length meant feeling something he could not say briefly. The letter contained no sentiment. An accounting? What the Alliance produced for the Iron Islands in specific terms. An assessment of Robb, competent, developing but not yet Tywin's equal, aware of it, which was what saved him. And one line about Theon? You did what was needed. What you are needed for next is your own business, as it has always been. And I will not interfere. 3 readings to understand it. When Theon understood, he sat in his cabin and looked at the line a long time. His father was not capable of saying what it meant. The line was what Balon Greyjoy had instead of the thing he could not say. It was enough. For Theon Greyjoy, at this point in his life, it was more than enough. Robb built a fleet. Not a war fleet. The North had neither the tradition nor the harbors, but a trade fleet, the first in Northern history, staffed initially by ironborn captains between Balon's service and their own enterprises, who found Northern coin acceptable in place of Iron Island politics. It operated out of White Harbor, and by its second year was trading with Braavos, Pentos, and the Free Cities directly, on ships the North owned, not the military victories, not the settlement terms. This was the real consequence of the Greyjoy alliance, the demonstration that the North could have a fleet if it was willing to learn from people who had always had one. Balon never commented. Yara, when she heard, sent one raven to Theon. He learned the price Robb paid was not in the settlement document. It lived in how his lords talked about the war, the specific discomfort of men recounting battles won with Ironborn beside them, the old wound of the Greyjoy rebellion set aside without healing, the knowledge that Western ports now paid Ironborn toll, and that this was the price of the independence they had bled for. He carried it the way he carried everything traded in the war, with the awareness that every victory had a ledger, and the debt was owed to specific people whose names he knew. He paid it by governing well. That was the only currency that actually settled the account. By the end of his first decade, he was a better ruler than anyone predicted. A life that had consistently undershot its expectations in the short term and overrun them in the long. The thing the Alliance produced that nobody planned for arrived in the 4th year of the settlement, a raven from Pike, in Yara's hand. Balon was dead, a fall from a rope bridge in a storm, the way he would have chosen if he'd had the choice. The succession was contested. 4 captains, 2 distant cousins, the traditional option of a kingsmoot. Yara was the most obvious heir and the most contested, not because she was less capable than the alternatives, but because she was more capable, and capable women in Ironborn culture drew a specific category of resistance that had nothing to do with capability. She was calling a kingsmoot. She asked one thing from the North, not military support, not political endorsement, but the presence of Theon Greyjoy at the kingsmoot as a Greyjoy of the blood, making her case. Because Theon, 3 years at sea, not at Pike since the alliance was made, was the one person in the Iron Islands whose history gave him credibility no military record could buy. Ward, hostage, liaison, sailor. He had been all of them, and none of them, and he was therefore the voice that could reach all of them. Robb sent the raven onto Theon's ship with one line of his own. She needs you. Go. Naga's Hill, Old Wyke, the oldest democratic institution in Westeros, older than the Wall. Anyone with a claim presents it. The captain's vote, the one who makes the best case, wins. Theon had not made a public speech since before the war. He stood before 400 Ironborn captains who had known him since childhood and had opinions about what that childhood produced. He did not perform. He said, "I spent 6 years as a northern hostage and 6 months as a liaison between a wolf and a kraken, and I was not entirely welcome in either place. What I am is what I've always been, someone who knows both sides of the water. Yara Greyjoy knows the sea. She knows the old way. She knows when to fight and when to sail. And she knows that the alliance we built is the most valuable thing the Iron Islands have had since the rebellion, and that keeping it requires someone who can sit at a northern table without forgetting where home is. He stopped. That's what I'm here to say. The rest is for the captains. He sat down. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after great speeches when the audience is not yet sure what it heard. Yara won. Not unanimously. 3 of the 4 challenging captains took a significant minority, and that minority would be managed for years, which was the nature of Ironborn politics. When the assembled captains shouted her name, not a cheer, a declaration, the sound of people naming something they intended to hold to, it carried across the water to where Theon stood at the hill's edge. She found him there. You're not going to stay. Not a question. I'll come back. Don't tell me when. Come when the water brings you. The most Ironborn thing she had ever said to him. He did not know exactly what he was, but he knew that Yara was queen, and that this was correct, and that his part in making it correct was the most useful thing he had done for them. Those facts were enough to leave with. Yara's first act as queen was a formal raven to Winterfell. Not a treaty renegotiation or a harbor dispute. A request for a permanent council of maritime affairs. Regular meetings to manage the sea lanes, the tolls, the trade fleet questions, and the 15 ongoing disputes generating paperwork since the settlement. An alliance of governance, 2 polities choosing to maintain what necessity began. Robb wrote back the same day. Yes, name the time and place. I'll send Catelyn. Then, after a pause visible in the handwriting, 1 more line. She's better at this than me. In Pike, Yara read it. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count. A brief private adjustment containing amusement and respect, and something she would not call affection, but that functioned like it. She folded the raven. She went to work. She did not waste time on finished things when unfinished ones were waiting. White Harbor, 3rd year of Yara's reign. The council met twice yearly, alternating between White Harbor and Pike, and the meetings were the most practically consequential political events on the western coast of Westeros. In its first 3 years, the council resolved the harbor toll rate, a fixed percentage, audited by a joint clerk. The jurisdiction question for mixed cargo, determined by the captain's flag, not the cargo's origin. And the piracy question? What to do about captains preying on ships the framework was meant to protect? The piracy question produced the most unlikely outcome: a joint enforcement mechanism, Ironborn longships, and northern warships policing the sea lanes together. The first joint military operation between the houses was not a war. Nobody called it an alliance. Everybody knew what it was. Catelyn Tully Stark and Yara Greyjoy became, over 6 years of biannual meetings, the most effective political partnership in the North's history. They did not like each other particularly. Catelyn found Yara's bluntness abrasive, and Yara found Catelyn's diplomacy exhausting, but they had watched each other be correct under pressure enough times that respect was no longer a choice. They disagreed often and resolved it through a mechanism they built themselves. Whoever had the stronger evidence won the argument, regardless of whose interest the evidence favored. Simple in description, revolutionary in a world where political disputes had always been resolved by rank or force. By the 5th year, the mechanism was being referenced as a model by lord-to-lord disputes that had nothing to do with the sea. Theon's ship appeared in White Harbor every 6 months when the council met there. He never attended. He was not a political figure and had no intention of becoming one. He arrived 2 days before, visited Catelyn's household for an evening, rode out to look at Winterfell from the hills south of it. He had not gone inside since the war. He stopped at the hill, looked at the gray walls, and went back to his ship. He met Robb in the harbor district on the council's second day, not by arrangement, but by the kind of coincidence that stops being coincidence when both people know the other's habits. They ate. They talked. The North, the fleet, Marjorie's pregnancy. Theon said, "You're going to be a good father." How do you know? Because you'll be too anxious about it, which is the correct response. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be accurate. He raised his cup. Robb raised his. Behind them, the harbor was full of northern and iron-born ships at anchor together, and the council in the hall was solving a problem about mixed cargo jurisdiction. And neither of them had to be in that room, and both of them knew it, and neither went back that night. Tywin did not retire. He sat on Tommen's Regent Council as the Westerland's representative, governed efficiently, and waited. He waited for the natural fragmentation of an interest-based alliance, the harbor disputes, the jurisdictional arguments, the first time Robb and Yara found themselves on opposite sides of something that mattered. He had studied the Stark Greyjoy arrangement and understood that interest-based alliances fragment when the interests diverge far enough. He was patient because he could afford to be. The Westerlands were intact. Gold was still being mined. He did not need to win immediately. He needed peace to produce the conditions for winning eventually. Catelyn had told Robb to watch for this 3 times since the settlement. In the 4th year, Tywin arranged a marriage between a Lannister niece and Lord Paxter Redwyne's eldest son. The Redwynes commanded the largest naval force south of the Iron Islands, unremarkable on its face. Adjacent families, the kind of arrangement that happened every year in Westeros. In practice, the first step toward a southern naval coalition to counterbalance iron-born dominance of the western sea lanes. Yara's intelligence raven to Catelyn was 5 words. Old man is building a fleet. Catelyn's raven to Robb was longer. Accelerate the northern fleet. Ensure the Maritime Council framework includes provisions that complicate what he's planning. A statement, not an alarm. She had anticipated this in year 2. Tyrion arrived at Winterfell in the 5th year, ostensibly for a Regent's Council review. He sat across from Catelyn in the Great Hall and said, "My father is building a southern naval coalition." I know. He's arranging a Stormlands land corridor to the eastern ports. By the time Tommen comes of age, I'm aware you're ahead of it since year 2. Then, what do you need from me? She had been waiting for this. His political schedule. Not the fleet. Everyone can see the fleet, who he's approaching, and in what order. That's asking me to betray my father. I'm aware. He was quiet for a moment. I'll need something in return. A formal role? Liaison between the southern governance structure and the northern one. Something without a name yet. You want to be Theon. I want to invent a different version of what Theon invented. I'm the only person alive trusted on both sides of every settlement this war produced. Catelyn looked at him. I'll speak with Robb. Tell him I'm the right person. He knows that. It's not the question. What is? Whether he can trust you. That's the right question, Tyrion said. I'll earn it. Outside, the North's first real winter since independence had begun. Inside, Tyrion Lannister was offering to spend it in service of a peace he hadn't built but intended to protect, which was, Catelyn thought, the most honest thing he had proposed to anyone. Robb Stark was 24 years old and had been king for 6 years. He had a daughter, 2 years old, named Liara, after the grandmother he never knew, and a wife who governed the court's political surface while he governed its substance. Together they had built a northern court, taken seriously by lords who had once considered the North a cold irrelevance. The fleet, the Maritime Council, the Tyrian arrangement, keeping the North 3 steps ahead in a game not yet finished. He stood at Winterfell's walls in the early morning, the way his father used to. He thought about Ned. South for honor, did not come home, and what his father would make of what the North had become, proud and worried. In that order, he returned to his solar. He began his day's work. Yara Greyjoy was 30 and had been queen 2 years and had survived 3 challenges to the Seastone chair. She governed differently from Balon, less on old way tradition, more on pragmatic outcomes, more effective, less beloved by the captains, who valued tradition above results. She was not interested in being beloved. She was interested in being correct and being followed, and she had learned to separate those requirements when necessary. She sat in Pike's great hall in the morning and read the Maritime Council's report and marked 3 items for the next session. She thought, briefly, not as a habit, about what Balon would have made of what the Iron Islands had become, satisfied and disappointed. In that order: satisfaction for sovereignty, disappointment for the tradition, modified to make it functional. She folded the report, sent for the captain managing the Western Sea Lane Patrol. Work to do. Theon Greyjoy was at sea. He was always at sea when no council was meeting. His crew was 11, mixed Ironborn and Northern, which would have seemed impossible 6 years ago, and which nobody commented on now. He ran the route between White Harbor and the Bravo Sea Market, which he had established not because anyone asked, but because he knew it from his Ironborn knowledge and saw the gap. He was not a political figure, not a liaison, not a hostage. He was a sea captain in the North's trade fleet, a thing that had not existed before the alliance, and the right person for it, because he was the only one who was both things simultaneously and had stopped being embarrassed by that. He stood at the prow in the morning, the Western Sea ahead, Iron Islands to the south, the North behind. The place he occupied, neither, both, in between, was the place he had always been. For the first time in his life, it was not a problem. It was a position. The ropes creaked, the sails filled. Ahead of him, the horizon was the clean line between water and sky that sailors live for, where the known world ends and the possible world begins. White Harbor, the 7th Maritime Council. 5 hours on the jurisdictional question about Ironborn ships in the eastern ports. Neither Catelyn nor Yara was stopping. The resolution came from the Joint Clerk's office, one Stark secretary, one Greyjoy captain's son, who had developed a fluency in both political traditions that no one raised in only one could possess. A dual registration system, no new law, only a new form. Yara looked at it. The clerk did better than both of us. That's what institutions produce when you let them run. Catelyn said, "My husband would have called it a legacy." What do you call it? Evidence it was worth doing. A fact, not sentiment, and the most personal thing Catelyn had said in any session. Yara let it land without comment. The clerk filed the mechanism. They moved on. The council ended at dusk. After supper, they walked to the harbor and stood on the dock, northern ships and Ironborn long ships at anchor, side by side. 6 years ago, that would have been an incident. Now it was Tuesday. Yara said Balon would have hated this. Ned would have found it extraordinary. Extraordinary or impossible. He would have said, they're not different things. A pause. Your husband was a better man than my father. They both got what they wanted, which is rare enough to count. Ned wanted the right thing. Balon wanted the permanent thing. She gestured at the harbor. The permanent thing includes this pier. And the right thing is still being determined. A fact, not a regret. The water moved. The ships rode at anchor. Neither woman went inside until the light was gone. In Theon's cabin, locked chest under his bunk, a letter, 3 years unfinished, addressed to Robb. He tried a 7th ending. The alliance was built on mutual interest and survived on something I have no name for. Not trust. We didn't trust each other. Not affection. We didn't particularly like each other. Something more practical than trust and more durable than affection. We showed up. We did the work. We kept being useful past the point where it was comfortable and past where it was easy. I don't know if that's a relationship or a treaty or just what happens between people who've been through something real together. But I'm glad it exists. I'm glad you said yes to the Kraken. I'm glad the Kraken said yes to the wolf. I'm glad I was the water between them. He sealed it, he would deliver it in person. When the council met, he went on deck. The sea was wide and cold and indifferent to everything except the quality of seamanship it required. The only test that mattered on the water, and which Theon Greyjoy had been passing for 6 years, longer than he ever expected, and exactly long enough to be something real.